Participants, good morning and welcome to our second We by Social EU lunchtime talk on socially responsible public procurement. We are happy to see so many of you connecting today. We had over 190 registrations, and we're really happy to see all this interest in socially responsible public procurement. Before we start, let me remind you a little bit how it works for this lunchtime talk today. So all the participants are taking part via the web streaming. There's a 30-second delay, so take that into account. Only the speakers' microphones and videos are switched on. But the audience can still interact by posting questions through Slido, and you see the code appearing on the screen. So take a moment to connect to Slido so you can post your questions there. And please identify yourself when you post your question. I would also ask you to please post the questions on a rolling basis because we will only have a short time for the question and answer session. So we are collecting the questions as our discussion is happening. So for today's agenda, it's quite straightforward as usual. We have a short introduction and then we directly dive into the discussion with the speakers. And then again, we have a short Q&A and some closing remarks. So let's dig into today's event. As you know, these events are also there to promote our Buying Social Guide, which we published last spring. It's a guide which provides concrete indications to public buyers on how to achieve social impact throughout the procurement procedure. And as some of you will know well, it's structured around the procurement process, but we also try to cover as many different social objectives which can be pursued through public procurement as possible. And the guide also covers some of the procurement aspects that are more relevant and which relate to the protection of labor rights and human rights, and human rights due diligence in global supply chains. And this is why we also wanted to have an event specifically on this topic. There is growing consensus in civil society and also among public buyers that assessing and addressing the risk of human rights violations in the industrial supply chain is a key aspect of using public funds responsibly to incentivize sustainable production. And with the Buying Social Guide, we really tried to show various practices and techniques which allow public buyers to consider and address the risk of human rights violation in the preparation, in the launch, and the award phase, but also in the contract management phase. For public buyers across the EU working with suppliers and sub-suppliers on human rights due diligence is not just a theoretical possibility, but it's really a reality, and it's well consolidated among certain buyers. And we have loads of examples in the Buying Social Guide of public buyers using human rights related considerations in procurement, but also in the collection of good practices that we published in 2020. So today we really wanted to take the opportunity to discuss with some of the front runners in this field, which are two expert practitioners from Sweden. So the first one is Pauline Gosberg. She's the National Coordinator on Sustainable Procurement for the Swedish regions and county councils. She has been working for 10 years for the Swedish county councils and regions, and she in particular led their collaborative work on sustainability requirements. She helped establish a division of responsibility to operationalize sustainability in the procurement process. And she also worked for the OECD for a time. And our second speaker for today is Christine Talbo. She's a lawyer with a lot of international experience in the domain of business and human rights. And she currently works for ADA, which is a Swedish central purchasing body for the county councils and regions. And she deals in particular with supply chain due diligence and sustainability issues. So thank you very much, Pauline and Christine, for taking the time to discuss with us. And let me dive into the discussion by asking you, and maybe this is a question that's a bit more for Pauline, what prompted Swedish buyers, and in particular the regions and the county councils, to tackle human rights violations in public procurement?
Well, thank you, Anna, and also thank you very much for taking this initiative and an opportunity for us to share our experiences on why taking a due diligence approach in public procurement is such an effective tool to protect human rights in global value chains. We started because we had to. There was this media critique and report showing that the surgical instruments that the regions our main responsibility is healthcare, that the surgical instruments were actually being manufactured by children in Pakistan. Obviously, this was highly sensitive to our politicians. You know, we cannot conduct healthcare in Sweden if it is to the detriment of people's health somewhere else in the world. So that kind of started our work. At the time, I mean, this was kind of controversial because it was not clear whether we were allowed to do that under EU procurement directives to hold suppliers accountable to human rights. I think since then, since 10 years ago, the expectations on public procurement has changed a lot. I mean, we, both from citizens, but we see that in international frameworks such as the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, which is not just directed at businesses, but also to governments, where public procurement is highlighted as a tool to protect human rights. So if critique in media was the reason why we started, I would say today, I mean, it's still risk management. We still want to identify and minimize our risk and have transparent and robust supply chain, which has become even more important, I think, after or during the COVID, but also use that as a leverage to, as a big buyer, to promote the goals in the Agenda 2030, because I think value for money includes other things than lowest price. Value includes other values. So I think during this 10-year period, I think we've gone from human rights obligations in public procurement being questioned, being voluntary, being seen as secondary objective, to now being more mandatory and high expectations from citizens.
Thank you for the great reply. I think it's precisely why we are doing this webinar. We really want everyone to know that this topic is not anymore a secondary, it's not an afterthought. It's becoming something that quite a lot of buyers are starting to think of, and it's actually a duty in a way for the public administration. But maybe I'm wondering if all of our participants, and in particular the public procurement practitioners, are familiar with the concept of due diligence. So I wanted to ask maybe Christine to clarify what it means to address due diligence in a public procurement process.
Thank you, Anna. And I also want to thank you for inviting me to this webinar as well. And it's very exciting to see that there are so many people listening in. So as Pauline said, this is obviously linked to the UN Guiding Principles and also to on business and human rights, and also to the equivalent OECD guidelines. And those guidelines, we use them, even though the second pillar in them is for businesses. We actually use that second pillar in our work, and that means that before we enter into procurement or in the analysis phase, in the pre-study phase, we identify and assess negative impact in the supply chain. And then during the procurement phase, we prevent and mitigate negative impact through different contract requirements and conditions. And then during or after the actual procurement, we monitor these requirements and conditions. So that's basically what it is. You identify, assess, you prevent and mitigate, and you monitor and follow up the requirements that you've used. As we do this in line with the different guidelines that the UN and the OECD have developed, and our contract clauses are built on the UN Guiding Principles, and we use them ourselves when we do our assessments prior to entering into a procurement process.
Thank you, Christina, and also thank you for mentioning the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. I think there's still work to be done regarding, on raising awareness on how useful these instruments are also for buyers. Actually, as you said, it's mainly for businesses, but it actually provides some very useful indications to buyers as well. And again, a bit in the same spirit as the previous question that I asked, I think that a lot of practitioners in the field of public procurement maybe are not necessarily experts in human rights. So I wanted to ask you, how do you know if you're a public buyer if you are going to buy something that entails a risk of human rights violations? Do you see the Swedish authorities, using certain risk management categories or risk assessment tools that are specifically meant for this purpose? And maybe, it's a question to both of you, so feel free to intervene as you prefer.
Maybe I can start. As you say, it can be difficult for buyers because the expectations on public procurers has increased. They do not only have to consider human rights considerations, but environmental requirements, gender, accessibility, maybe even to include people who are far away from the labor markets, etc. So it can be kind of tricky to have expertise and knowledge within all those areas. But I think my advice would be not to invent the wheel again, but rely on what is already out there. When it comes to the regions, what we've done is we've done a risk analysis of the whole of our category tree. We buy everything from footballs to MR cameras, and obviously we cannot focus on everything. So we have identified 8 high-risk areas for human rights violations, etc., which includes categories such as garments, pharmaceuticals, ICT, medical gloves, food, etc. But there are other tools out there as well. I know that the Swedish National Procurement Agency has developed risk analysis, the Norwegian Procurement Agency, the Netherlands has excellent risk analysis tools, and also so has the US. So here, I would say that there are a lot of analysis out there. So public buyers can easily identify whether the category is a high-risk category for human rights violations.
And I can continue. So at ADA, the company where I work, which is a central purchasing body, both for regions and municipalities, we have not decided to look at specific risk categories. Instead, we do these kind of analysis that we do for all of our categories, for all of our agreements. We have around 130 different agreements spanning everything from products to services, everything from cars to condoms, IT, solar cells. And what we've developed during the past year is something that we call 2030 agenda analysis. So for all of our in the analysis phase of the procurement, we analyze all of actually we have divided our work into what we 15 sustainability aspects. These sustainability aspects, they cover far more than sustainable supply chains, which is our focus here today. So they cover risks for people, the environment, and society. So we do an analysis covering all of these 15 aspects, and we do this for all of our categories, for all of our agreements. Our template for doing this is actually on our website. It's just that it's only available in Swedish, but of course you can download it and try to translate it as best as you can. And every sustainability aspect is linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. So you can see which SDGs that you potentially contribute to if you decide to use a requirement or an agreement condition that specifically tackles one issue or several issues. So that's a tool that we've recently developed. We also do, I think Pauline is going to talk about that a little bit more later, but we do also a lot of external monitoring regularly. And I think that's really, really important. So since we work mainly with framework agreements and they are 4-year long, but it means that we can't just do this type of analysis once every 4 years. We have to do external monitoring through the media and through NGOs and through other sources constantly during the contract period. And obviously this is information that helps us in the next cycle when we start a new analysis prior to a new procurement, but it also helps us immensely in our monitoring of the agreement conditions during the contract period, because what we pick up in the media is something that we can then ask questions. We can pose questions about what we picked up to our suppliers and ask them, so how do you work with this specific issue, and how do you work with your suppliers in the next tier with this specific issue?
Thank you for these replies. I think it shows very well also that this is a rolling process, and it's really also about a bit the relationship that you have with the supplier. It's not just something that you verify up front, and then it's something you have to continue monitoring quite proactively throughout the duration of the contract, and the contract in a way is this instrument that allows you to sort of also hold the supplier accountable to a certain extent, yeah. But moving on to like concretely when you're preparing the tender documents, how do you integrate these aspects in the tender documents? Do you use? I mean, you mentioned before specific contract clauses. As you mentioned, Christine, of course, verification and monitoring is important. But is there also are there escalation mechanisms to hold precisely the supplier accountable, or monitoring mechanisms that are sort of built into the contract clauses?
Yeah, maybe I can just
okay.
kick off. Okay. No, but I think for requirements covering sustainable supply chains, well, first of all, the Swedish National Procurement Agency, together with the regions and other, have harmonized our contract clauses. And at the moment, we're actually updating those to align more with the UN guiding principles and the OECD guidelines, and hopefully also the upcoming due diligence legislation, which I heard that is going to be postponed again. But coming back to that, putting it into the contract. I mean, first of all, we have to define the supplier commitment, which will include the Bill of Human Rights, the ILO Core Convention, etc. So the contract shall be fulfilled in accordance with those fundamental terms, and this is kind of the what in the contract. So then we will define how those commitments shall be fulfilled, and that is the due diligence process. So to fulfill, for our suppliers to fulfill these obligations, suppliers need to have in place policies and a due diligence process to identify and mitigate potential and actual harm to people and planet. So that's how we put it into the contract. And then obviously, I mean, no contract, or you can't hold any suppliers accountable if it's not also sanctions connected to that. So there's also sanctions such as corrections. We can have fines. We can obviously cancel contracts as well, but obviously that will always be like a last resort, because I mean, if we cancel contracts, we have no means of actually helping those whose rights are being abused. And then a third mechanism is maybe also to have like an escalation. We have like an escalation stair, like step. So violations will kind of escalate. So buyers will know exactly what to do at each stage of that escalation stair. And finally, if there's no other means that we can continue, there is always the possibility of canceling the contract.
And I can just add one thing. So the bulk of what we do for sustainable supply chains is what Pauline just told you. But obviously we can also, when there exists a product certification such as fair trade or TCO certified for electronics, we can use that. So we separate we separate what we call supplier requirements, which is really the supplier has to have policies and processes in place to do these analyses themselves and follow and monitor the contract. But we can also, in the same contract, use specific certifications such as fair trade and TCO certified. But again, those type of certifications only exist for a very, very limited number of sectors or products. So these kind of overall contract clauses that we use are fundamental for our work, because those we can use in every type of sector, in every type of agreement with every type of supplier.
Thank you. That's very clear. I think maybe one of the questions that some parts of the audience is wondering about is, and you already started mentioning this before, Christine, so maybe that's more of a question for you. How do you actually make sure that the contractor sticks to these supplier commitments that he's taken through the contract? So also, what kind of instruments do you use to monitor these commitments?
Yes, this is obviously a huge part of our work. So we use different steps, I would say. So we usually start with sending a self-assessment questionnaire to the supplier, where the supplier answers questions related to their process for due diligence. Then we review these answers and any documents that they've attached, and we decide whether their answers are sufficient as they are, if they are approved solely on these answers and documents, or whether we need to go to what we call an office audit. During an office audit, and we usually go, in terms of ADA, we usually go to office audits in 95% of the cases. And the main reason for that, I would say, is that Well, first of all, we have a lot of suppliers that do not have these policies and processes in place to the extent that they are required. But we also have often we have issues with it's not being the right person replying to the SAQ. It's difficult to find the right person within the company. Sometimes it might be large companies. It might be a headquarter function in a different country, and the people at the Swedish level don't even know, and they don't even forward the SAQ to that person, and so on. So this means that in 95% of the cases, we go to what we call an office audit. During the office audit, we use an auditor, or it's really a consultant, that performs an audit at usually the head office of the supplier, including interviews with the different management staff and others that are important to verify that they have the due diligence processes in place to meet our contract clauses, and obviously do their due diligence in the supply chain. We also have in our toolbox, we have the tool of factory audits, and we have done factory audits. It does not happen that often because obviously you have high costs related to that, and you have logistics related to that, and other challenges. But we do factory audits on occasion, and the regions are even better at doing that. And that's another thing that I wanted to add too, is that Pauline's secretariat, where she works, and my company, or the company where I work, we have we've signed a letter of intent to cooperate so that we can share our audit results to an extent, at least at an aggregated level, and also we share the responsibility for monitoring certain suppliers, because many suppliers are the same in our supply chains, so that we're making life easier both for us and the supplier. So instead of ADA and the regions coming to perform a factory audit or an office audit, we make sure that one of us do it, and then we share the results, and that's important. And then I wanted to also mention that ADA has this specific service that we provide for our customers, and the customers in this case is the Swedish regions and municipalities. We have 21 regions and 290 municipalities in Sweden, and they can, if they use our framework agreements, they can also use this service, which we call the sustainability check. Through the sustainability check, we more or less for free, we assist them in doing this kind of monitoring through SAQs and document review and office audits and potentially factory audits on their own agreements. So not our agreements, the ones that they can use, the framework agreements that they can use, but actually their own agreements. So if the city of Stockholm or the city of Gothenburg has procured something, and they want an SAQ and an office audit to be performed on that supplier, they can send that to us, and we go through it, and we see if it fits into our whole schedule, and if we can do it, and then we do it. And that's another way, because then we provide those results to a much greater audience through my pages on our website. So they can log in to our website, which means that all municipalities and regions can find the results from our monitoring within the sustainability check. They can find that on our website, but it's behind a wall, so you have to log in. But yeah, so cooperation here is key, also for the supplier's sake.
Thank you. I think it's very clear to us that there's a huge organizational dimension also to this type of work, which allows you to be successful precisely through sharing the same instruments for verification, but also sharing the information among the different authorities that you're working for. So my next question is, do you think, I suppose you need some sort of specific expertise in-house, or you need to have access to specific expertise on this type of issues. And you know, if you could tell us a bit more about what is your experience, because I think, as I was saying, for many public buyers, it's not so obvious to have this kind of expertise in house. So it would be interesting to see how you dealt with it.
Pauline, do you want to start maybe and say something how you work?
Yeah, sure. As you say, I mean, there are high expectations on public buyers, you know, and I don't think that they can become experts in all these areas. I think you need to look in-house for that expertise. And I think within the regions that I see that is that it works the best is where there's a close cooperation between the procurement office and the sustainability office, because here you will find the expertise on assisting the procurement team on what requirements to make and how to follow up and etc. So I think it's really important to have a cross-functional work within your organization, especially when you work with category management, because then you're going to have like the experts on sustainability issues, but also the on that specific category when you do your market analysis, because sustainability has to be an integrated part throughout the procurement cycle. It cannot be an add-on. Because quality, I think this is part of the quality of the product that you buy. So cross-functional work within your organization, I think that's maybe a key.
And I can give you a picture of how we work at ADA. So within the central purchasing body, we have in total, I think we're 75 employees, around between 70 and 80 employees. Out of those 70, 80 employees, 7 of us are sustainability people. So we have a sustainability department with a sustainability manager and then 6 strategists below him. And what I want to say is that, so first of all of us, all sustainability strategists, we're categorized. So our procurement is divided or structured through a category management system. So I have my own categories where I work, and then we have a team, and in that team we have category managers, we have procurers, we have coordinators and other admin staff around us. So within that team, I bring the sustainability knowledge into that team. But as Pauline said, it's really important that it's not an add-on, but it's actually integrated into this team. So I'm working really hard in every team that we have to get all of the people in the team to feel that they have a sense of ownership of these issues as well. I'm working hard on making sure that they are part of our external monitoring. Every second week we send out a newsletter internally. And we're trying to tie all of these things to the 2030 agenda and really making them feel that they are part of change. And I think that's really important. So that's one way of how we're working. And I wanted to say that another thing that's important here is that, so out of us 6 sustainability strategists, I'm actually the only one who has a focus on social issues. So my colleagues are all different types of environmental experts, chemists and biologists and so forth. And I think this is something that we have to try to change together, because if we're gonna see sustainability and the 2030 agenda as something that holds together, we have to start giving social aspects as much room as environmental aspects, which means that we also need to hire experts in human rights to the public sector to work with these issues. There are loads of experts within civil society and other functions in society that I think if they understood the opportunities that exist in the public sector today, they would come straight away, because this is we're at the forefront of really trying to change things. Sustainability is key, and everyone knows that, and we're really working really close with our suppliers and really affecting change. So employ the right expertise.
Thank you very much, Christine. I think, you know, personally, I completely agree with you in the sense that I feel like green has become a very sexy word, but it's probably now the turn for social to become just as sexy as green. So, and that's very valid for the public administration as well. So I'm really with you on that. Yes,
Anna,
Paulina.
can I just add just a comment? I mean,
Yes.
I think it's really important at this stage also to have a comprehensive approach to risk. You cannot treat environmental risk and human rights risk in separate silos because they're so interconnected. The climate crisis is indeed also a human rights crisis, I would say. So, you know, you have to integrate those when you work with sustainability.
Absolutely, yes. Let me ask you maybe a couple of final questions, which I think, you know, it's important, I think, for the audience also to hear from you what kind of impact you've had through this amazing work that you're doing. Have you tried, you know, assessing the impact of what you do on workers, however difficult that may be? And I'm thinking especially about the nature of procurement as an instrument, where, you know, each contract is different. It requires a different approach, and it probably also is taken a bit separately from the supplier's perspective. So how do you measure impact? Have you tried? Have you seen any changes also from back when you started?
Maybe I can just start commenting on that. I think this is a challenge that we share with the private sector. You know, how do you measure social outcomes? And I mean, it is difficult to measure these. But and you know, there's this saying, you know, what gets measured gets managed. But not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything that we can measure matters. So I would say that, you know, in our audits, I mean, we do see concrete results. For example, we've seen large improvements in the factories in Pakistan, for example. You know, for 10 years ago, we had child labor, we had hazardous working conditions, etc. And now, at least in the export factories, we've seen large improvements. I mean, there's still problems in Pakistan with child labor, but, you know, we've seen improvements. And also, for a couple of years ago, we did factory audits in Malaysia in medical gloves factories. And here we also found severe violation when it came to debt bondage, severe overtime, etc., etc. And the results from those audits were that the 3 factories actually implemented so-called zero-cost policy, so no worker had to pay to get a job. They also decided to repay the recruitment fees to the employees that were actually in debt bondage. So, of course, you know, public procurement, we see results every time we do follow-ups and working together with suppliers in this case.
Thank you very much, Paulina. I think because we are starting to get a bit tight on time, let's go straight to some of the Q&A questions. And I'm very happy to hear that we received a lot of questions. So bear with us, be patient, because we will only be able to discuss with our speakers a couple of these questions, but we will try to produce something to be shared with you soon, where we will be able to reply the other questions as well. So you will hear from us on this, I promise, because we also have some links to share with you. But maybe, Carmen, can you read the questions?
It's working. So Jessica is asking, first of all, she mentions that the lunch talk is very interesting. And she says, some supply chains are very long and start in far countries. how to ensure that human rights are respected throughout the full supply chain, and 2, has, to your knowledge, the application of human rights contract clauses led to changes into supply chain structure and composition?
I can start, I think. So now, if you could, could you put the questions up again so it's easier to see them? So first of all, when we work according to the UN guiding principles and the OECD guidelines, we follow their levels of responsibility. So that's something that I think people need to keep in mind. So a supplier has different levels of responsibility depending on if the supplier is causing the negative impact, is contributing to the negative impact, or if the supplier is directly linked to the negative impact. One answer to the question is that when we do the analysis, we look at the whole supply chain, and the requirements that we pose, we pose them on our supplier, which in turn needs to forward them. And in the future, we're also hoping to add forwarding of the actual due diligence requirements, not just the issues as such, no forced labor, no child labor, etc., to their supplier, which is the next tier for us. But again, we have to look at this is what you call the cascade effect, because this is supposed to then be cascaded down the next tier. But if you look at what kind of responsibility do we put on suppliers in terms of for remediation, for instance, which Pauline mentioned as the example of in Malaysia, well, the requirement in terms of remediation looks different depending on whether you have caused, contributed, or is directly linked to the actual negative impact. And we are using those tools in this. So we're not expecting our supplier to take full responsibility for what's happening in the cobalt mine in the Congo, because there are structures set up for this. Our supplier is meant to forward the requirements and map their supply chains, preferably work according to the OECD conflict minerals guidelines and so forth. But it's important to understand the different levels of responsibility. And the second point, has, to your knowledge, the application of human rights contract clauses led to changes in supply chain structure and composition? I think now it turned dark here. I hope you still can see me. I think that's tougher, and I mean, the examples that we have now are more linked to the supply risks linked to the pandemic, where we can see that some of our supply chains have actually moved to Europe, but that is probably more linked to supply risks more than negative impact in the actual supply chain.
Thank you, Christine.
Maybe linked to the same question, what about the cases when the contractor is mainly a reseller of items produced by another manufacturer?
Do you want me to take that, or
yes,
you can add? Yes. No, but I mean, our contract clauses is directed to our direct supplier, which can, in many cases, be resellers or retailers, etc. So the responsibility is on them. So even if they have sub-suppliers that are what do you say, like varumärkesägare, what's that, Christine?
Brand owner.
Yeah, brand owner, exactly. So even if it is the brand owner who might be producing the product, it is still the reseller who has got the main responsibility. And I think this is where we've struggled a bit, because to actually get them on board to understand their responsibility in the chain, it's not just to pass the buck, because the responsibility is within our direct supplier.
And we can also mention actually that Monday this week, we published an important report called State Imposed Forced Labor in China, Swedish buyers monitoring of electronic supply chains. Because in this specific case, we have this situation where all of our suppliers are resellers, and behind them we have large IT brands. And maybe if you're lucky, maybe Anna can distribute that report to the attendants. Otherwise, you can find it both on Adda's website, adda.se, and on Pauline's website, which is more complicated. Yeah.
Thank you, Christina. Yes, we will contact all the registered participants to send them a few links and hopefully some answers to the questions that we received and that we cannot address today, simply because I understand there are quite a lot of them. So I would like again to thank you, Pauline and Christine, very much for taking the time today. It was extremely interesting, and I think that the audience has enjoyed your discussion as much as I did. Let me say a few words just to conclude. As I was saying, this is the second online lunchtime talk in a series of socially responsible public procurement talks. The next one will take place in February, and it's going to be about using considerations related to gender equality in public procurement. You will all receive the link to register for the next talk via email, together with a short questionnaire to gather your feedback, which allows us to also improve on the organization of these events and to better define the content. And also don't forget that we have a series of webinars on innovation procurement. The next one is going to take place on the 20th of January, and it's going to focus on IPRs. And we will also have one in March on risk management. And also I want to take the opportunity to mention our LinkedIn groups, Agents of Innovation Procurement and Actors for Social Impact Procurement. These are LinkedIn groups that we created, but they are not commissioned LinkedIn groups. So please join them and feel free to share any sort of material or news or events that relate to innovation and socially responsible procurement. And then I also want to present our wonderful team working on strategic public procurement. And these are all the people who help really bring these online events to you. They all have contributed equally. So thank you very much, Marie, Carmen, Anne-Christine, Samira, Ivo, Laura, and Anita. And yes, so we have one final thing, which is a Slido cloud that, you know, we would like, okay. We cannot do the Slido cloud today, I'm sorry. But then thank you very much again for participating, and thank you, Pauline and Christine. And we hope to see you for the next lunchtime talk on social procurement. Have a nice day. Bye.
You too. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.